Welcome students to lesson 10 of the Living World topic. In this lesson we will be exploring what life is like in a rainforest and trying to uncover the mystery of why soils in a rainforest, despite what you might expect, are in fact infertile. Please write the date, title and learning objective and have a pen and paper ready to learn. Time to review prior learning. Please write 1 to 10, answer the questions from memory, and then mark your answers. Game time. Number 1. Rainforests have almost constant temperatures throughout the year. 2. Rainforests are mostly located along the equator. 3. There is usually low air pressure at the surface where rainforests are located. 4. Rainforests have slightly variable precipitation throughout the year, as the direct sunlight moves north and south of the equator. 5. The informal economy describes people in jobs that are not protected by contracts, pay no taxes, nor have bank accounts. 6. Volcanic eruptions can cause temporary global cooling because they release a gas that reflects sunlight called sulfur dioxide. 7. The Buffelsdrij afforestation project in South Africa led to increased biodiversity. 8. A nature reserve is a protected natural area that cannot be damaged by human activities such as logging. 9. A detritivore is an organism that feeds on rotting material, which makes it easier for decomposers to break down. For example, worms are detritivores. 10. A primary consumer is always a herbivore, which means it consumes vegetation, not other animals. Please give yourselves a mark out of 10. If you got 8 or above, awesome. Write any questions that you got wrong and their answers and then test yourselves on these questions repeatedly so that you learn them. Excellent. To introduce this idea of what life is like in rainforests, I'm going to show you some photos and some questions will appear next to them. I'd like you to answer the questions using the best of your understanding. Go for it. Here's the photo. Here are the questions. So number 1. Why are rainforest trees tall? You may have had a number of possible answers, but the principal one is that rainforest trees are tall so that they can reach the sunlight, because they're all trying to compete for sunlight, so the higher you get, the more sunlight you can get. 2. Why do many animals avoid the forest floor? Well, again, many possible answers, but you could have said there are good habitats in rainforests, such as branches, which birds can make nests in. You could have also said that there are predators on the ground, which animals are trying to avoid. And finally, you could have said that there's a lot of food up in the high branches of the rainforest, for example, fruit and nuts. 3. Why do trees only have branches at the top in rainforests? This is an idea we'll be exploring more this lesson, but if you look at the photo of the rainforest, all the trees have their branches and their leaves at the very top. The leaves on a tree are aimed to get sunlight for photosynthesis. There's no use in having branches and leaves in the shade further down the tree. That's why they're all near the top. 4. What are the layers of the rainforests called? You may have learnt this in earlier years, but you're going to learn it better today. I'm not going to tell you yet, but if you already got them, as we look forward in this lesson, then fantastic. And 5. What happens to leaves when they fall to the ground in rainforests? You should have said that when leaves hit the ground in rainforests, they follow the nutrient cycle, which means that they are broken down by decomposers and detritivores, and the nutrients from the broken down leaves are released into the soil. Okay, so this lesson we're going to answer 2 questions. Number 1, what is the nutrient cycle like in rainforests? And number 2, what happens in the different layers of the rainforests? And why is that important? First of all, 2 keywords you need to know. The first one is a latticeol. A latticeol is an infertile soil that you find in rainforests. And the second word means this here. You see this rock? It's made of layers, horizontal layers. And this cake similarly is made of layers. The technical term that we use for these layers are strata. And so a rainforest, just like a rock or a cake, has layers. It has strata. And so we say that rainforests like rocks and cakes, are stratified, made up of layers. Can you please write these two keywords and their definitions in your books or on paper? Excellent. So the first big question: what are the key features of the nutrient cycle in rainforests? Subtitle. So imagine this is a very typical rainforest. Lots of trees packed closely together. How does the nutrient cycle work in rainforests, and how is it different to the basic nutrient cycle that we learned earlier on in this topic? Well, the first thing you need to know is that there's very dense tree cover. This means that there are lots of leaves that could potentially fall to the ground. It also means that there's lots of shade further down. That affects the nutrient cycle. Additionally, it means there's more food for animals. The different trees are often very different species, which means they provide different types of fruit and nuts and leaves that are eaten by many different types of consumers. As a result of the dense tree cover, there's high biodiversity in rainforests. Similar to the nutrient cycle in any ecosystem, any land-based terrestrial ecosystem, you have rocks that are weathered by rain and wind. And the rock minerals break down and go into the soil and provide the minerals that make soil fertile. Minerals like magnesium and phosphorus. These are the things that plants need to grow. And when the nutrients are released into the soil from weathering of rocks, they are absorbed by the roots of the trees. And they help the trees to grow. Now, as in every nutrient cycle, the primary consumers eat the trees, the producers, and then those primary consumers are eaten by secondary consumers. But as you know, with every ecosystem, the consumers die. Because there's such a high biodiversity of trees and high density of trees, there's a high biodiversity of animals as well. Very large populations of many different species of birds, insects, mammals, and reptiles. When the animals die and hit the ground, and when the leaves fall off the trees, if they're broken off by animals or by rain, they decompose rapidly. You have a huge layer of leaves and of animals that are dead on the ground in rainforests. So the litter layer is very thick. There's a large amount of biomass on the surface of the soil in rainforests. Consequently, there is a high population of detritivores, small animals that break down rotting material like worms. This accelerates, speeds up the decomposition of the litter, the dead organic matter. Additionally, the hot and wet climate in rainforests, also known as a humid climate, provides the perfect conditions for bacteria and fungi to grow. That means there's a very large number of bacteria and fungi in the soil in rainforests, which means that the organic matter that hits the ground decomposes really rapidly. And what happens to it when it's decomposed and the nutrients go into the soil? Well, they are very quickly taken up by the producers, the trees. This is important for the following reason. Look at this dark brown layer here. That's the fertile soil. Notice how it's very thin. And below it you have the latter soils. They are the infertile, iron-rich soils. That's why they're orange. Soil that has iron in it is orange, and nothing grows in that layer. And the fertile soils are very thin. Here's why. Because there are so many trees which have a vast network of roots that spread near the surface around the ground, the nutrients are rapidly absorbed by the trees from the soil, which means that nutrients that absorb into the soil do not remain there for a long time. They return to the trees. Additionally, because of the heavy, regular rainfall in rainforests, the nutrients in the soil are constantly being washed away if they're not being absorbed by the trees, often going into rivers. This process in which nutrients are washed out of the soil by rain is called soil leaching. The effect of nutrients being absorbed by trees and being washed away, leached by rainwater, is that the soil is infertile. except for a very thin surface layer. This also affects people because farming is difficult in rainforests. So that's the nutrient cycle in a rainforest. It's faster, the biodiversity is very high, and the soil fertility is quite low. So what happens in the different layers of the rainforests? Here's a typical diagram of a rainforest with a number of animals that you might find in different rainforests around the world. First idea we need to know is, what are the different layers? And secondly, what are the features of each layer? So, the layers of the rainforest can be separated like this, into these categories. At the very highest point of the rainforest, these trees that emerge from the top of the rainforest, that's the emergent layer, made up of the highest trees. Only a few trees reach this point, stick out of the highest layer, fewer than 10% of all trees. And they reach this height so that their leaves can get the most sunlight for photosynthesis. This is a very light layer in terms of sunlight, and it mostly has bird species located within it, partly because it's safe from predators. Below the emergent layer is the mid-canopy. This is the most biodiverse layer of the rainforest, and it's where most of the branches in the trees have their tops. It's where most photosynthesis happens in the rainforest, and it's the densest layer of vegetation. That is the mid-canopy. A number of animals live in the mid-canopy because it's where there's a high number of foods from trees. For example, flowers for bees and insects, and nuts and fruits. They often appear in this layer, the mid-canopy. So many animals are attracted to the mid-canopy layer. Below the mid-canopy is the lower canopy. Just below the main crown, which is the area of the tree where all the leaves are, is the lower canopy. It's slightly darker and thinner. Many animals still populate here. Animals like bats and snakes and lizards, they populate here. They don't need as much sunlight, and they are trying to avoid predators. The snakes hunt here because they know that lots of animals live here. Below the lower canopy is the shrub layer. You have small plants that are not trees with bark. They live around this layer. It's darker here. It's really difficult for a plant to photosynthesize here. Consequently, plants that live in the shrub layer have huge leaves to be able to absorb what little sunlight there is available. The banana plant, for example, with very large leaves, would exist in this layer. And finally, at the very bottom is the forest floor. This is where most of the large mammals live, like jaguars, where most insects live, like ants, and arachnids, like spiders. They live in the forest floor. The infertile and fertile soils are found on the forest floor, and this is where the decomposition of dead organic matter happens. So let's talk about the adaptations of animals that live and plants that live in the rainforests. Firstly, most trees in rainforests have these things called drip-tip leaves. They are waxy leaves that extend into a sharp point like this. The waxy surface means that rainwater runs off, and so they stay dry when it rains. This is important because if they stayed wet, they would rot. They would mold, just like your bathroom gets moldy if you leave it too humid, if you don't open a window after you have a shower or a bath. Trees do the same thing. And the sharp-pointed drip tip allows the rainwater to run off quickly. This means that the water is quickly transported down to the roots of the tree so that it can be absorbed. Drip-tip leaves are a very important adaptation. They protect the leaves and they ensure that the water is channeled to the roots of the tree. Additionally, the tallest trees, the emergent trees, they have buttress roots, really wide, strong root systems that extend out beyond the trunk of the tree. The main purpose of this is to keep the tree supported when there is a storm, as is common in rainforests, so that the tree doesn't collapse. Additionally, the buttress roots provide habitats for other animals, and because the roots extend very far and wide out from the tree's base, they are able to absorb a lot of nutrients from the thin layer of fertile soil. A plant that doesn't actually settle on the ground, doesn't develop roots, is called an epiphyte. It lives on another plant. Epiphytes do this because it is easier to start life at the top of a tree than to grow a long stem to try to reach sunlight. So epiphytes like orchids and bromeliads are common in rainforests. A bromeliad is a plant that stores water in its centre within its leaves and is often a habitat for frogs, and they very often live high up in the canopy so that they can reach sunlight. And they don't need a trunk to be able to survive. Epiphytes rarely harm the tree they live on, but they use it to support them. And finally, an idea we've discussed before is that you'll notice if you ever visit a rainforest that they have very few branches lower down the trees. This would be a waste of energy to grow branches in the shade. So, the trees are long and thin and they have their branches at the crown at the top to receive maximum sunlight. Okay, time to assess learning. I'm going to ask you some questions, write your answer, and then check based on my explanation. So question 1. What is a lattice sole? And why does it happen in rainforests? Why is it found in a rainforest? So you should have said that lattice soles are infertile, iron-rich soils that are found in rainforests. They are found because the nutrient cycle means that nutrients are removed from soils in rainforests very quickly, either by the tree's roots or by soil leaching from heavy rainfall. Question 2. Why do trees mostly have their branches at their crown? Trees have branches at their crown because that's where most of the sunlight is. The very dense layer of trees, called the mid-canopy, means that anything below this layer will receive very little sunlight. Question 3. Where are rainforests distributed around the world and why? Where are rainforests distributed around the world and why? You should have said that rainforests are mostly distributed along the equator because this is an area of low air pressure and intense heat from the sun. So that air is constantly rising, cooling and condensing to form rainfall. The hot, wet climate creates the perfect conditions for rainforests and the trees to grow. Okay, time to embed learning. I'm going to show you some questions, answer them using your understanding from this lesson, and then mark your answers in green pen. Go for it. So number 1, highest layer and why do trees grow tall? 2, why do rainforests have infertile soils? So very important ideas. Nutrients absorbed rapidly from the soil, a mark. Regular heavy rainfall, nutrients leached. Soils are infertile and it's difficult for smaller plants to grow. 3, explain how the rainforest climate contributes to the rapid nutrient cycle. Try and use the word humid. It provides the ideal conditions for decomposers. Because of the high number of decomposers, dead organic matter is decomposed more rapidly. Make sure you've got these 2 points. 4, why do rainforest trees only have branches near their crown? Sunlight, waste of energy to have them lower down, and so they grow most of their branches at the top of the crowns. 5, suggest 2 reasons why rainforest trees have wide root systems, but not necessarily deep root systems. They may support the trees during storms to stop them collapsing, and additionally, they are needed to access the nutrients in the thin layer of fertile soil. Please give yourselves a mark out of the total. Make sure that you add any corrections in green pen so that you don't make mistakes in the future. Excellent. Okay, from today's lesson, write 2 questions from memory and then answer them, and then test yourselves on those questions in a week. In the next sequence of lessons, we're going to talk about deforestation in rainforests, and we're going to find out why it's such a problem. And finally, we will learn about how we can solve it. Join me then.